Okay, here we are, live again. After 2 weeks without Scott, he's back.
Hello,
I thought he doesn't
good
like
to be
me.
back.
He does. Yeah, there we go. Okay, let's go straight into it. You know the drill. We didn't prepare anything. It's all about your questions. So start asking anything you want. If no questions, we're going to close it early. And we already have one from Disco.Trotinet. Does it make sense to version Helm charts as folders in Git to avoid the overhead or maintaining a chart repo like Harbor, Chart Museum, etc.? I use Argo CD, have specific values and rarely update charts. And I will assume, correct me if I'm wrong, Disco.Trotinet, I will assume that you have a Argo CD app manifest that specifies this is where the chart is and this is the specific version I want. And I don't know how Scott feels about it. I wouldn't version it. I wouldn't keep third-party charts in any Git repo. I might consider mirroring them or keeping them in my own container image registry, though. Not in a repo.
Correct. What I would always do is relocate. I believe in always relocating Helm charts, at least for production. For dev, whatever, fine. You can depend on external. But once you decide to really bring something into your environment, always relocate it, but relocate it as an OCI artifact into a registry. Now, if you're on-prem and you're self-hosting, Harbor de facto standard, I think, and the best option out there. If you're in the public clouds, if you're in Azure or Google, use theirs. If you're in AWS, deploy Harbor and use that so that you don't need to use ECR.
Let's make sure that AWS never sponsors this channel.
Or let's make sure that they add create repo on push, and then, I'm fine recommending ECR again.
Exactly.
But yeah, I would say definitely push it to OCI, and I recommend strongly. There was a tool called Relocates. Now there's Asset Relocator for Helm. There's a bunch of tools out there that can help you relocate Helm charts, including their dependencies, like all of the OCI artifacts and container images that they reference. Definitely look at doing that because you want to minimize your dependency on external sources as much as you can.
And to make it clear, you're still keeping in Git which specific version of a chart you're using and which specific values you're overwriting over the default ones. So that's in Git.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
The chart itself is not. At least I don't see a reason why.
Right. I have no problem with the source code of a Helm chart being in Git, but you never pull from there. Meaning, like, if you're building your own Helm chart, the code should be in Git. The Helm chart should be in Git, but that's never where you pull from. When you push to there, and you create a tag, CI runs a Helm bundle and Helm push, pushes that to an OCI registry with the Git tag as the tag of the OCI artifact, which is actually the version of your chart.
Yeah. Okay, next one from Bazooka89. How to patch KDE2 under FreeBSD? I have no idea. I don't know if you, Scott, know.
The answer is don't use FreeBSD and don't use KDE2, and then your life is great. Just use Ubuntu. Be done with it. Stop with FreeBSD.
Okay, from Nikos. In previous lives, you mentioned to use Argo CD per cluster. Can I have one master and controls others? If yes, how? I don't know whether you can.
Yeah,
and if you can, but
Argo can deploy to multiple clusters, right? You can register multiple clusters and then use application sets and all that to deploy to multi-clusters and yada yada. I'm personally against it. What I like to do is have one brain cluster. If we're talking large environment, have one brain cluster or service cluster that has the main Flux CD, or if you're an Argo person, Argo, but it's the same idea. Have one of those that deploys Flux or Argo accordingly into each cluster and creates the initial configuration. So that would be the app of apps application that gets deployed in Argo CD, or the Flux customization to your main GitOps repo that you have to anyways manually apply. That should be applied through the main Flux. but then all reconciliations of applications in there should be through its own Flux CD. That way I don't have a single point of failure and you don't hit performance issues like you're going to with One Central.
Yeah, so Argo CD that manages Argo CDs, but not in terms of controlling what they do, but installing them essentially, right?
Exactly.
Yes. I mean, now I'm not sure, second question, can I have one mastering that controls the others, whether that's what you mean, Nikos? Or you meant literally control, kind of tells it what to do. If it's the latter, don't. Now, there is actually two things there. First is that I actually wish if Argo CD backend would be separated from frontend. That would be awesome, right? Kind of if I would be able to run engines in different clusters and then have one UI. That would be absolutely awesome. And I know that Acuity, but that's commercial now. Area has some sort of agent that runs in each cluster and does something in that direction.
Doesn't CodeFresh also?
Yeah, CodeFresh. Basically, all the commercial versions of Argo CD are mainly focused on scale, kind of like helping you do that. But if it's open source, yeah, Argo CD in each cluster, or one that controls all clusters. I don't like that, but go for it. Hi, for home labs, should we move to Gateway API or Ingress is fine? I'm not sure whether that... Do you think that, Scott, that question to begin with is specific to home labs or...
Yes and no. And I'll tell you why. Home labs, in the end, in the name it says itself, it's a lab, meaning it is for you to test things. Home labs are usually for you to test things, to break things, to continue. That's how I treat my labs. That's how a lot of colleagues of mine treat their home labs. In that case, 100% use Gateway API. Because if you're doing a lab here and you're testing things out and you're, checking this, definitely check out Gateway API. Now, that does not mean you don't need to know Ingress first. Always learn Ingress first, then you learn Gateway API to understand what its benefit is. And because still almost all Helm charts are Ingress. So Home Lab, because it's not production, yeah, I'd say use Gateway API because it would be awesome and you'll get to learn what's the new coming thing, right? Tigera just announced that Calico 3.30 coming out in May is going to have a Gateway API implementation built in, right? So, it's becoming more common, Gateway API. So good to get your hands on it as quickly as you can in a lab environment. I still don't recommend it in production almost ever. It's just not widely spread enough.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the way I like to explain it is that if you're right now running production and you have Ingress, there is no rush to switch, right?
Right.
But if you're planning for the future, then yeah, count with Gateway API. Okay, from Guy, what is your opinion is the future for platform engineering in AI and LLM era? There is a short term and long term, at least in my head, right? Short term is that I'm using heavily AI to help me write stuff. And I don't differentiate, to be honest, between platform engineering or any other type of software engineering. It's helpful. I don't trust it at all. So zero trust over there. But I do use it kind of, hey, generate code that does this. And then I go through the code, almost never accept it fully. Sometimes accept 10%, sometimes 90%, But it's helpful to get me started. That's how I see it. And it will get better with time. And in some unknown future, it might start doing some operations, but that's so far away that I cannot even comprehend it. And so the way I see it is actually until AI gives me almost all the time correct suggestions, I'm not thinking about it doing anything for me, right? And if you don't know what I should do, then I don't trust that you know what you should do either, right?
I think kind of similar, although I think there are a few other things that people aren't using LLMs for enough today, that especially with things like since DeepSeek came out and Gemini as well, both of them have very large context windows. One of the biggest challenges that we've had till today, and we've seen this in code bases and things like Cursor and things like that, is that because the context window was not that large, you couldn't even fit most code bases into the context window, making it very difficult sometimes to ask good questions, and that's where you get so many duplicated pieces of code and things like that because its context was so small. That's growing now in some of these other models, and what I think that's going to enable is things like that we've started to do is like implementing log analysis when a Jenkins pipeline fails that automatically sends out to an LLM that, summarize what's going on here. What should I do? How do I troubleshoot this? What went wrong? Send that back then to the person that triggered the pipeline saying, hey, here's what's wrong, right? Or think of that in the Kubernetes world with something like Carport down the road, right? Which today from Fusion Stack is kind of iffy in my mind, but the idea of it is great. And once it has all the hierarchical data, if I have a failure here, it could automatically just say, hey, what's wrong with this resource? It has all that data in its context, shoves it up to an LLM, and it can say, hey, actually, the RDS instance resource within your Crossplane composition is using a outdated version of Postgres that was removed from AWS, and therefore, right, like there's a lot of stuff I think in that area that we're going to see, and that integrated into tools like Backstage, like VS Code plugins, like any of these interfaces to our platforms is, I think, where we're going to go.
Or Datadogs and Graphanas of the world as well, kind of.
Exactly, right? That's where it's going to be. In these large data lakes, as the context window grows, our opportunities grow. I think that till now, the context windows have been too small, which is why that hasn't been enabled. But Gemini 2.5 now, and what's gone on with DeepSeek R3, like we have now millions of tokens in our context that we can utilize. So that's awesome.
And, it's not only about context. I mean, it is definitely about context window being bigger, but it's also about doing multiple rounds, just as humans do, right? Kind of, if there is something wrong, it's not that I take all the information at once and kind of look at it and say, this is what's wrong. No, you start somewhere and then you go somewhere else, and from that leads you. So they need to start doing many iterations before they give me answer, instead of kind of like, hey, this is the info I have, and according to that info, this is what you should do. No, go right.
Which
is basically, I won't tell LLM to do what I won't tell LLM to do in let's say 5 minutes what takes me 8 hours, not in 5 seconds.
That's what the O models and all of that do, right? The reasoning models, and for sure, reasoning models are going to be huge there. And I think that the reason that LLMs are so good there is because I don't need them to be exact. If it got it wrong with what I should go and take a look at from the logs of my Jenkins file, the worst is that I spent 5 minutes doing that, realized it was wrong, and then I go and actually read the logs. And so what did it really add? A few minutes of me going down a wrong path? Well, I was probably going to go down a wrong path looking at the logs anyways from that, disaster of logs of Jenkins. So it's like in 90% of cases, it saves me time. Awesome. I'm fine with that. If it's customer facing, if it's end user facing, if it's something that's actually like going and doing something instead of just analyzing data, that's where I get worried and think that we're still probably years away from it being reliable enough to do that.
Okay, let's do a short break for the money. Codefresh is giving us sponsoring the channel. Go there to learn about GitOps. You get certification, you get training, you get to learn everything about GitOps. It's awesome. Go there. They will be happy. We will be happy. Everybody's happy. Thank you, Codefresh, for sponsoring the channel. Go there. Learning.codefresh.io. Hey, yeah, I think you need to type. I never tried it. You need to type probably Victor and get 50% off. Probably. Anyways. Where are we? Okay. Oh, I think that this is going to be unanimous decision. Where is it? Wait, sorry. Okay, here we go. One library chart for all apps or separate chart per app. Now, let me give 2 answers first, and then Scott is probably going to go bazooka on this one. First, the short one is no. Don't do one chart apps for chart for everything. The longer one is that this reminds me so much about similar discussions we had with CI pipelines in the past, right? Where companies with thousands of employees would be building that one big Uber pipeline, right? That has 57,000 conditionals and stuff that decides if you actually want that. I think I feel that having one big something that serves multiple purposes, unless your chart is the same for everyone, then do it, right? is always a recipe to have much bigger complexity than separating it into smaller ones. Now, I'm giving a generic answer that applies to Helm charts in a way as to anything else. If you have different things, but within those things there are some repeated things, we solve that through libraries in some form or another. Let's say you have two applications, right? You don't have two copies of the same application. You have two applications, but then you have library that does X, Y, Z, that, I don't know, encryption that is the same in both, and then you bring in the library to otherwise different source code, right? When applications are concerned. Now, in case of Helm charts, you can install Helm chart within a Helm chart, which is ugly, but you can create your own components. We call it CRDs and controllers, right? And then say Helm chart that just wraps different ones depending on what you need. Oh, this application, the backend application with this database, some other application with some other database, right? And then you use Helm chart to wrap it up. But still, different Helm chart for each app. That's a hill I'm going to die on, unless it's the same app.
Okay, so I will give the complete opposite answer, and I will explain why.
Okay.
The only people that should be creating Helm charts are vendors. No company should be creating them, therefore no Helm charts, period. But if you are a vendor releasing a solution, it should be a library chart, because if you have dependencies on Postgres and on this and on this and on this and all of that, then it should be a library chart, because you don't want the installation of your tool to be Helm install, Helm install, Helm install, Helm install 30 times.
Yeah.
You want it to be one Helm install. So because the only people that should ever be creating a Helm chart, because there are much better solutions out there for internal apps, the only ones that should ever be doing it are vendors, because it's the de facto standard for third-party dependencies. Then it should only be library charts. You should never be creating separate chart, that whatever, because that's the only people that should be creating Helm charts in my mind. Everyone else should be creating Carvel packages, KCL, Qlang. What's that one that you liked before that packages up Q?
Pickle.
I forgot what it's. No, the one that packages Q. It's like Helm, but
Timoni,
right? Any of that stuff, awesome. Like, do customize. Do raw YAML manifest before you go down Helm. Right?
We're in complete agreement, Scott, on this one. I was just trying to give the answer by putting aside my
politically correct.
Yeah, kind of
your
like
biases.
Not biases. Biases, okay. But yeah, don't use Helm for your stuff. But if you do use Helm, okay, let me rephrase the question.
Okay.
If you have to use Helm because your life depends on it for whatever silly reason, don't do one Helm chart for everything.
Correct. Although all I will say is that the best sticker that was ever created in the Kubernetes world was by Commodore, and it is "See you in Helm," and there is a reason for it.
Which is very strange because Commodore people in Commodore like Helm but yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, from Mate, how would you govern cloud costs? Would you shift left the ownership to teams or keep cost ownership under SRE DevOps teams? We're thinking that every team should own costs related to their apps. I think so as well. Actually, I do agree that each team should own the cost because that's the only way to, I believe, to make people aware that, hey, if you do something differently, it will cost you less. If it's not costing you anything, why the heck would I not have request 100 gigabytes for my application? Kind of. That's certainly better than one, right? But what you cannot say is that every team owns costs without giving them ownership of what that is, right? Kind of like you need to let people. You cannot say you pay for this, but you're not. You have no right to decide which database you use or whatever the decisions are. So owning costs comes with owning decisions.
Exactly. In my mind, the answer with most of these things, let's say like in the Kubernetes world, it's the easiest. The answer is that no one's supposed to own it, because the issue is that the developer has no clue what resources he actually needs, and the SRE has no clue what the application actually needs. And because of that, the actual answer is tools like ScaleOps, or there's other tools, what is it, Cast AI or whatever, any of these tools that automate the right sizing of resources, that's the right way of doing it. It's this idea that, I've been using for a while of shift down instead of shift left. Just shift things down to the platform. Stop with this shifting of responsibility of who's in charge of what from one person to the other. No, because no side knows how to manage requests and limits correctly in Kubernetes. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Any SRE or DevOps that says that he knows is wrong, and any developer that says he knows is purely lying, which is why the answer is shift it down to an automation that does it. The same thing exists in clouds.
Yes.
It's just a bit more complex.
To me, but I see those things as easier parts, right? Kind of using smaller, figuring out how much memory and CPU your application needs. That's much easier than re-architecting your application to need less.
Correct.
Right?
Correct.
Because people usually attack the easier part, right? Oh, I have WebSphere application running in Kubernetes, kind of, and can I right size it? Yeah, you can right size it to what WebSphere needs. You cannot right size it what it should be. you cannot do it.
Exactly. Which is why, again, I think it's a multi-tiered here. There typically is the cloud ops team that's going to look at things, or a FinOps team that's going to look and say, hey, like, this makes no sense, right? There's other things, like, for example, when I talk to, a bunch of people that run things in AWS, for example, so many people do not know about topology-aware hints or topology-aware routing in Kubernetes and pay huge bills for cross-AZ traffic. Now, that's cloud costs, but that's because they didn't add an annotation on a service that makes it do topology-aware routing. Now, it's those small things that's where I think platform engineering comes in, and things like Kyverno policies and all of these different things, and then something like Backstage or whatever that would visualize it to come and give the person the recommendation of, hey, man, like, you're hitting your performance is going down because you're crossing AZs, which is larger latency, and it's also costing more money, right? The main thing is you can always find something else along with money that is, affected. So like in that case of cross AZ traffic, it's latency. So your app is performing worse, and money. Always when you return that message, start with the latency is bad and could be better, and it will also save money. Don't start with money, because then they're going to throw it away, think, oh, this is just the finance guys, I'll get past them. If you start with something they care about, then it will affect.
And also, if you start with money and end with money, then the conclusion will be always we do nothing simply because, hey, yeah, it costs more, but we have to have it. Kind of like we need it. Right? You need to explain actually why somebody doesn't need something, or why something it would be better off elsewhere. Actually, I think that the whole using wording cost in all those tools is bad. I think it's good from the sales perspective, kind of like it's easier to sell to a company a solution that says we're going to reduce costs. But realistically, I don't think that we are reducing costs. We are optimizing. Right, resource usage and performance and what's not.
Exactly. When you look at a tool like ScaleOps, for example, a lot of times when you install it, like which is the tool that I happen to like the most in this area, it's like a lot of times what we see is that it actually upsizes more applications than it downsizes, because there's actually a lot of times that you're giving it just not enough requests, and if push comes to shove, it's not going to have the resources that it needs because it's using 3 times more than the requests. That's not legitimate, right? So optimizing can end up costing me more money, but I'm going to get stability, I'm going to get predictability, and it's going to be better. Now, in the end, you do end up saving money in almost all use cases, but yeah, certain workloads are going to cost me more. But that doesn't matter because they're going to be optimized, and it's continuous optimization. And that's what matters, because apps aren't static either. Okay,
let's see what next. I think in the Neon database video you mentioned that you wouldn't recommend using Argo CD GitOps for creating ephemeral environments. Why is that, and how would you implement that? Let me first clarify. When I say ephemeral environments, I mostly think it's not exclusive. I'm two major use cases: development environment. I'm developing something on my laptop. No matter whether the environment can be a local or remote. That's kind of separate discussion, right? But I'm developing something, or I'm having a ephemeral environment probably for, let's say, pull requests, so that I can deploy something and test it and so on and so forth. Now, for development, I'm certainly not going to use Argo CD. Just a fuss for no good reason. Kind of like, I'm going to execute a script or a command or whatever it is, click some button somewhere, and my environment will be running and I can develop. Locally, remotely, separate story, right? I don't see the reason why we would use GitOps for that. Now, for pull request, I kind of have mixed feelings. If it's easier for you to use GitOps, do it. I think that there is benefit in not using it as well because it's synchronous, meaning faster. You can apply something and then you know that it's applied. Kubectl apply and just kind of run tests or whatever you want to do. If you use GitOps, that's fine. I think it's very important to have the desired state in Git for all permanent environments. If you have it for ephemeral, fine. They're going to be deleted anyway. If you don't, that's fine as well. That's very simple. But for development, definitely, I'm not going to install in my local cluster Argo CD just for the sake of working. That's not happening.
Right. In dev environment, I completely agree. I do think that for ephemeral PR-based ones, especially with Argo CD, I think that it is a very good idea to have that because Argo CD, if you're deploying Helm charts, if you're doing that, it does not treat Helm like Helm. So doing it through Argo CD, you may find the bug or you may find something.
Didn't you say that
some other
they shouldn't be using Helm?
I did, but there are third-party applications that you deploy, like Postgres and things like that, right? So, there are still situations where I have a third-party dependency. So, in those cases, Argo CD, because it treats it differently than the way that you would with just Helm install, what you want to do is you want to limit the amount of things that the first time you encounter them is in production. So by doing it in the ephemeral environment, you are getting as close to that dev prod parity as you can, also for the installation, that makes that better. Now, to solve the issue that Victor had mentioned, though, of the synchronous, that's where I strongly believe that what you should do is, push to a GitOps repo or have an application set do its thing and, with the PR auto generation and yada, yada, all of that. And then what you actually do, and this is the key, is you auto trigger a reconciliation using the Flux CLI or the Argo CLI from within your CI/CD. So when you create that from the PR, the workflow that, pushes the manifest or does whatever also says, hey, reconcile now. And then it's an extra 5 seconds maybe over kubectl because it was the push and then trigger, but that's not what matters. So you get the near synchronous reconciliation, but you still get the benefits of being as close to dev prod parity as you can.
I just hope, as the time passes, I insist more and more that we use Helm charts that actually install operators. Kind of, CMPG, I install CMPG with Helm, but there is no Helm to create a single CMPG instance, kind of like.
They have one.
Huh?
They have a official Helm chart to install literally the CR.
That's idiotic.
That's
stupid. That's really, really.
I'm not saying
but no,
it's
going
smart.
back to
They have it.
Going back to Neon specifically, this was more generic answer. Neon does not have. That was my biggest complaint. Neon doesn't have a Kubernetes operator. So the only way I can actually instantiate a Neon database, to my knowledge, is actually two ways. One is execute some command, Neon this and that, so no Argo CD. Or to wrap things, what Neon has in a job or something like that, or a stateful set. I don't think that companies who don't do their own operator don't deserve me creating stateful sets or stuff like that. I'm not doing it.
They may have a Crossplane provider that I created from their Terraform provider.
Neon?
Yes.
Oh, don't. Really?
Upjet.
Oh.
What's the issue?
Neon Crossplane. Is it in Marketplace?
Not yet.
Oh, then you didn't create it. Okay,
I'll
but
publish it probably next week.
But that's cool. That's awesome. That's awesome because I really think that kind of Neon fits there very well. If you can use third-party, SaaS service and stuff like that, many people can't. That's really awesome, man. Do you use Datadog? If yes, what is your opinion about this tool? I don't use Datadog myself personally, but I know that. So this is hearsay, kind of. I cannot prove it, but every single person I spoke with has two things to say about Datadog. It's too expensive. It's so expensive that you cannot believe it. And the second is that it's so good that I'm staying there. That's what everybody tells me.
What I was going to say is that there's actually three things that people say about Datadog. It's too expensive, it's too expensive, and it's too expensive. But it's great, right? People love it.
The thing is that if everybody says it's too expensive, but almost nobody moves away, then that means that actually there's something to it.
Right. Listen, who was it? Splunk that Cisco bought? And the famous joke was that they bought Splunk because it was cheaper to acquire them than to pay their bill. I wouldn't be shocked if Datadog gets purchased for that same reason by some giant. But yes, it's expensive, but there's a reason why. They are reliable. They are good. Again, tools like Splunk are amazing as well, right? Like all of this area, the main challenge, I think, is that there is no standardization in the industry of what a dashboard manifest looks like. And because of that, to move from Datadog to anything else also, it's like even people that would want to move from Datadog, if you're in Datadog, the lift that it is going to take you to move from Datadog to anything else is way more expensive than the extra price that you're paying for Datadog. Same thing goes for Splunk, New Relic, Honeycomb. I don't care what you're using. That's typically the case with these large APM solutions, is that it becomes very challenging to move out of them because you become so reliant on them that the amount of effort to move is just enormous.
Okay. I'm going to jump through comments to prioritize one because I'm selfish. Thomas, thank you for $6. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Next time I see Scott, I'm buying him coffee from that money. Thank you so much. Why companies put up with such outrageous egress costs of major cloud providers? I have a theory, I cannot prove it, that very often because they don't know better.
So
That's
very
my theory.
often because they don't know better. And the other reason, I will not mention the name of a specific cloud provider that I'm working with now, which is not one of the major ones, that one of the reasons people use them is because they have they're very cheap and they have very good bandwidth support and allow large amounts of egress. The reason is just look at the experience with any of those clouds versus the experience you get with AWS, Azure, and Google, and you'll understand why people put up with the extra price because it's just so terrible in, a lot of these other, smaller, let's say VPS style clouds that, may give you a cheap bandwidth, but the overhead of everything else and the management and the quality of the services that you get are so much lower that, it's what the market has deemed reasonable. Whether it is or not, it isn't. But
okay, let's do a very quick more shout out to CodeFresh for sponsoring the channel. Thank you so much. Go there to get certified. Use Victor for 50% discount. Learn GitOps, learn Argo CD, all the jazz. Thank you so much. Okay, let's go to the next one.
Where is enthusiastic, Victor?
Oh, I'm so enthusiastic. Yes, kind of. Okay. Because Scott insists. Here you go. One more time. Learn CodeFresh. Learningcodefresh.io.
Learning.codefresh.io. The best place to learn GitOps. Use code Victor for 50% off on your first course.
Hey, you know what? From now on, you're saying commercials every time. This is going to be good for business. We're going to buy 5 copies. Okay. Have you got, from Alexander, have you got any insights regarding API security testing within the CI pipeline? Tools that might be useful in that area, process, and so on and so forth. BTV, thanks for a wonderful series of knowledge. Let me start by saying that I never think of tools for anything within the CI pipeline. Unless it's something like, check out the code and stuff like that. Whichever tool you're using, that tool should be executed, either runs in a cluster or is executed through a CLI, and it works with or without CI pipelines. Now, afterwards, you might find out some plugin that will help you with that tool, but you don't start with CI pipeline to begin with. So it does not matter whether it's CI pipeline or no. Next, depends what that API is. If that API is Kubernetes, then you will put all types of security something inside the cluster. And then inside your pipelines, you might want to do the same just for the sake to speed it up. But you secure, actually, let me give a more generic answer. You secure API by securing API, not by going to CI tools or anywhere else, say, hey, if this pipeline was run successfully, it's secure. No. APIs should have their own security, one way or another, running behind them. Admitting or rejecting requests, validating requests, and so on and so forth, be it Kubernetes or something else. What you do in pipeline is maybe execute the same thing just to get the feedback sooner, not to protect it.
Yeah. I think that there's a few things. There's API security. Obviously, there's scanning for open API best practices and whatever. Do you have a challenge? All of that. There's a question of, am I testing the Swagger, like my open API definition, or am I testing the code for API security, right? And that's also two very different things, because there's the implementation of the API versus the API itself. I think that one area that most people forget to do here, that I think it's hard to say if it's security or not. I like to say that it's connected, but is contract testing. And that's basically the security of you keeping your job. Because if you break the contract, then, your contract may be terminated if you terminate the contract between APIs. So, definitely that's something that needs to be tested, and there are great tools in that area. But API security, Black Duck, things like that are, probably the most common. But, there are a lot of good solutions there for testing the security of your APIs. The key is anything that can do it as code, defining it as code, and anything that can run as a CLI tool or whatever can run there. And ideally, it should have IDE plugins for whatever IDEs your organization uses. When I'm looking at tools like this in the industry, there are so many that, and they all do basically the same with pros and cons to each and every one, which is why what you really need to look at is what is your tool set. If your developers use only, let's say, the JetBrains IDs, so look for something that has JetBrains plugins, something that doesn't, get rid of it. It's not in your lexicon. Only look things that have JetBrains IDs. If you use Jenkins, look at what has a Jenkins plugin. If you have GitHub Actions, look at what releases a GitHub Action, an official one. If you have whatever you have, try to limit it down. Try to find the tools that fit into all those, and that's what you go and look at. Because the better it integrates with your existing tools. If you have Backstage, look what has a Backstage plugin, right? Like, you want to, in the end, look at what integrates with what I have, and then from there, go forwards.
I'm not sure. So kind of the Backstage part, I agree, kind of like, because that's visibility in a way, right? And I think it's important to have visibility in what's happening. But like whether it has GitHub Actions plugin or no, assuming it's CLI.
Again, GitHub Actions, Jenkins, maybe a bit less, although GitHub Actions is less. Jenkins plugin, if you're using Jenkins, I say is probably a bit more important because it's a pain to install the things into Jenkins agents and then managing Jenkins, right? Like, it's not as simple as things are in GitHub Actions, right? So, like, depending on your CI system, again, if they have it, what that means is that it's tested there. It's that they have practices around this. So whether there's docs around integrating with GitHub Actions or running it through GitHub Actions, or there's an actual action, or it's just an easy CLI, and then you say that doesn't matter to me. What really matters is less the examples, but more whatever your ecosystem is, see how much it can integrate with. Because if it integrates with more of your ecosystem, you're in a better situation, right? That's the general, I think. Yeah.
Which gateway API is better for you? From Nikos. I haven't tested them, to be honest. I mean, I do use it, but I haven't tested different solutions to... I don't know if you have any insights, Scott.
So if you're in AWS, VPC
ignoring
Lattice,
now the thing that some are GA and some are Alpha 1.
Right.
Obviously.
I happen to like Contour as an ingress controller, and I like it as a gateway API, although it's limiting. It doesn't have all the support for all the types of routes, right? Like, so if it suffices your needs, I like Contour. In the end, I still haven't tested enough of them. My favorite that I've seen so far is actually AWS's with VPC Lattice. The reason is that they actually integrated it as gateway API controller, but it integrates also with other things in AWS. So, for example, it can do gateway API, but with backends being a Lambda function and another backend being your Kubernetes service. So you can create like this VPC Lattice that will, in the end, allow you to migrate seamlessly from, let's say, Lambda into Kubernetes, or from ECS into Kubernetes. From a networking perspective, you can make it completely transparent, or to do blue-green between clusters. So you can do multi-cluster gateway API. There's a lot of really cool things there that are advanced and possible. If it's standard things, Contour is my favorite.
Okay, from Lyndon. Hi guys, any tips on landing intern junior role DevOps, no work experience, and I'm currently learning OpenTofu over Terraform. Do you think it's a good idea for me as a junior? And I can say no to quite a few of those. I don't think that anybody should be junior DevOps, except if company says, hey, you're going to do Terraform and we're going to call you DevOps and give you more money than if we call you Terraform expert, and go for it, right? But I think that that's a senior position that starts from a senior position, right? Because it involves many different things. It's never one thing. So you eventually get there rather than start there. That's my... and, you know, currently learning OpenTofu over Terraform, I don't think it makes difference. I think that it's extremely easy to learn OpenTofu or Terraform or any of those tools. Learning those tools is not a problem. Learning stuff that those tools manage is a problem.
Correct.
Right? You spend, throughout your lifetime, you will spend 98% figuring out AWS and 2% writing it in. I'm throwing random numbers, I don't know exactly. But very small percentage writing Terraform HCL or OpenTofu or whatever it is. Doesn't matter. Kind of, that's not a problem. You get it in a day, right? I mean, there is always something new to learn with any tool. But if you know AWS, let's say that that's your destination, there is almost nothing to learn with OpenTofu or Terraform.
Yeah.
Until it fails, but then that's a different, you know.
My
answer is
you don't want to stay as a junior, right? Like, no one wants to stay as a junior. You want to be able to advance.
Oh, no.
And I think that one of the things that I have noticed in the industry that's one of the biggest issues is that the first generation of DevOps, well, again, I don't like that term, but I'm not going to get into that debate again. If the people that started the DevOps movement and that first generation of DevOps engineers most of them started as system engineers, right? Linux administrators, system administrators, all of that. For all of them, when Kubernetes came around and Kubernetes used the word namespace, they're like, oh, it's like a Linux namespace. Today, 90% of the people that deal with Kubernetes have no idea that namespaces didn't start with Kubernetes and it actually exists in the Linux kernel itself and how the operating system works, making it so that when things go wrong, the debugging capabilities of people not even knowing what journal CTL is and standard Linux tooling is so large. That's why I believe anyone to be a senior, a really good DevOps engineer, has to do the grunt work and start in system engineering and do operations for a few years, gain the knowledge of Linux, gain the knowledge of Windows, gain the knowledge of operating systems, of networking protocols, of understanding these things, once you understand IP tables, NFT, VPP, whatever it is from a networking perspective, basic things, DHCP, NTP, DNS, you understand all of that, how it works. You understand TCP versus UDP. I'm not saying scientific, 7-layer, 5-layer, all of the, no, none of that matters. I'm saying practical knowledge, though, of also the way the Linux kernel works, Linux operating system, all of these. Then you move to DevOps and you understand what you're automating. So then your automation is good. If you don't understand what you're automating, your automation is going to be bad. And that is just a fact of life.
And assuming that apart from everything you said, you have some experience writing code, whatever the code is, including shell scripts, right? Once you reach that point, it is trivial to pick up any tool you want. Any tool. Kind of so trivial, so easy.
Right. I picked up Go in 2 days, right? In the end, because I knew before that, Python, Bash, Perl, JavaScript, whatever. Great. So you pick up another link. Okay, great. So then I was able to write a Kubernetes controller. Okay.
And just to clarify, when I say, and probably you think the same, Scott, when I say pick up any tool in no time, that does not mean that you will be the best one at that and stuff like that. There is always, I'm still learning, finding new things to learn in Go. But in a day, you can pick it up enough.
Kubernetes, Victor.
Oh, yeah.
Both of us started with Kubernetes in the 1. Single digits, right? In 1.4, 1.5, 1.9, whatever it is, in that area of the 1.x, before it was 2 digits after the 1. And we're still learning about Kubernetes in 1.32. That's a fact of life. You're always learning. If you're not learning, then you have an issue, right? You have to continue learning. There's always more to learn. But you're able to catch it, get that basic of it, and be able to start working with it very quickly.
Okay, from Buzz. For Kubernetes folks, are folks paying attention to network isolation? How and when in the life cycle are folks deploying Kubernetes network policies? If the question is, let's put it into 2 questions: when they should and when they are, right? Because I think that network policies almost never, exactly, or late, because there is, I think that there is evolution that is happening in teams, right? Kind of like you learn Kubernetes, kind of like you figure out deployment services, ingresses, and then you learn this, and then you learn that, and kind of gradually, eventually, you get to network policies. From the learning experience, that's definitely not where you start, nor where you should start.
Right.
Now, if somebody starts with a new cluster, but it has experience and already done that many times, then network policies would be there probably from the very beginning, right? With many, many other things, because kind of it becomes muscle memory.
Right. But let's be honest here let's just look at some data. Until a year ago, VPC CNI, the default CNI that almost everyone uses in AWS, did not support network policies. Okay? The largest distribution on planet Earth, with its default CNI that was used by almost all of its users, did not support network policies, and you had to install an additional secondary CNI like Calico or Entry or whatever it is on top of that to give you that. The default at the beginning of Kubernetes was Flannel. Flannel does not support network policies. Okay, so there was network policies is definitely a day 2, right? It's definitely a secondary step, unless you're in a highly regulated environment where it's a necessity even from day 0, right? Before the API server comes up, you need network policies. Not possible, but that's the demand that comes, right? I think where we're going to see a change here is actually really cool. I was just reading the blog post on 3.30 of Calico that's about to come out, and there's a great feature that's always existed in Tigera Enterprise of, I think they call it simulated network policy. It's similar to how in OPA and Kyverno you can set things to like audit mode, where it's not actually going to enforce the policy, but it's there running in the background and it gives you, feedback. Where basically what they did is they copied the Calico network policy, just created another one called simulated network policy. The only difference is the name of the resource. The spec is the exact same. And you apply that to your cluster, and then it gives me visibility before I go and apply a network policy. Great. Is this going to block any traffic? Would this actually make something go wrong? I think
that's very like cool, though.
It's amazing, right? And I think that
because nobody really knows. It's to me, it's similar like memory and CPU, kind of. How much memory and CPU you put?
Right.
Give me a week and I'll tell you.
Exactly. So if I put simulated network policies and then I can learn off of that and say, oh, yeah, oh, wait, no, that should not be blocked. Okay, I need to tweak this and whatever. The fact that it allows you to do that kind of playground on the environment is going to make it much more accessible. And that's moving to open source in May, in 3.30 of Calico, right?
Very cool.
I think that as more CNIs implement that, that's when we're going to see the larger adoption of network policies. Because unfortunately, with the abstraction layers of Kubernetes, where I'm saying from pods with this label to pods with this label in namespaces with this label, I want you to allow this ingress, but I have so many network policies as well. It's hard to understand what the impact of something I'm doing is. And having the simulation, being able to say, okay, awesome, I ran this for a week and it's good, great. Change the name of the resource, the kind, apply it, great, I have my network policy. That's going to make people feel safer doing it.
Okay, from, I cannot pronounce your name, Rajasilan probably, something like that. Anyways, any experience and comments on GKE with self-managed Istio using a separate GCP project for load balancer? I'm even confused. Why separate GCP project and a load balancer? Do you get it, Scott?
I'm not sure why you would use a separate project for a load balancer. Yeah, I don't know, and I don't know why you would go with self-managed Istio in GKE and not just, managed.
I mean, there could be a reason, but then there must be a reason, right? By default.
Exactly. I'd have to understand what the reason is and why you want it and whatever, and what this topology is to, whatever, to actually give it. I've never seen a topology like this. It doesn't mean that it's a bad topology or a wrong topology. I simply just don't know.
Okay. A lot of people would argue if DevOps is a junior role. However, what are your tips in navigating complex DevOps role for less experienced engineers? Now, there is a difference in practice and what I think. In practice, I know that companies are hiring DevOps left and right. I just think it's wrong, just to be clear. I'm not saying that everybody else thinks it's wrong. Just as it would be wrong to say junior, inexperienced full stack developer. Kind of, okay, can you learn front-end first? And then backend, and then years later databases, and you eventually you might call yourself full stack. Cool, kind of. But I don't believe in junior full stack developers, and I don't believe in junior DevOps. And I know that that's not how companies operate, but that's a hill I'm going to die on. And what are your tips in navigating complex DevOps world for less experienced engineers? I mean, and I feel that the question is actually contradictory to the first thing. Kind of like, if DevOps is a junior role, then it cannot be complex. Right? Kind of, I don't even understand it. Kind of like, it's either complex and then it's not junior, or it's not complex and it's junior. I don't get it. I don't know. Scott?
Yeah, the only thing I would say from a practical perspective is, again, the way that someone should be, if they are in the position that a company has given them the job of a junior DevOps engineer, and, they need to now proceed with this job that they got, the way that I always view it is learn what you need for your job. From there, move on. Meaning, if you, for your job right now, need to learn Jenkins, learn Jenkins. I look at it from a very practical perspective. You need to learn Kubernetes, learn Kubernetes. You don't need to learn Kubernetes, don't learn Kubernetes right now. Learn it later on. But learn, if your job in the end is a junior DevOps, what that really typically means in most cases is you are going to be a Jenkins engineer, a Terraform engineer, or a Kubernetes engineer, or something similar to that, right? It's going to be, you're going to be working on one of these tools or whatever it is. So learn that tool, work on it, get good at it, and then try and shift positions to something else, whether it's at that company or another company, where you can go and learn another tool and go and acquire the knowledge and experience, right? Don't do this every 6 months, right? I believe when I look at things, if someone has been in a job for less than 2 years and there's not really a legitimate reason, but it looks like every 6 months the person is jumping jobs, I would never even look at that person if I were hiring, because it's okay, so this person, why would I ever invest in someone that's just, leaving without giving any time back to the company, right? I have no problem if the person changed jobs 50 times within another company, because great, that means that he's, active, he's proactive, he's trying to move forwards and learn things, right? You don't want to look at someone who's just trying to get something and not give back, though. But learn a tool, learn it well, get expertise. You don't want to continue just doing that? Great, go find something else in another tool. Start doing that. But expertise in one thing, don't spread yourself too wide. You spread yourself too wide, people with a CVE that's 5 pages long of, I know these 25 databases, these 62 languages, and these 74 different frameworks. The answer is they know 0 of those frameworks, 0 of those languages, and 0 of those tools. They have basic familiarity. No one can know that much.
Exactly. But that's the danger, because it's so easy to think that actually the more stuff you have in your curriculum, you're better off, which I don't believe at all.
No.
Anyways, Conrad, what's the recommended approaches to adding health checks to Docker files? And I cannot answer that. I haven't been adding health checks to Docker files for a long time, because everything I do is Kubernetes, and Kubernetes does not care about your health checks in Docker file. I don't know, you, Scott. Do you use health checks in Docker file?
I don't use Docker files.
Okay, what do you use?
Build packs.
Build packs, okay. If build packs would have health checks, would you use them?
No.
Okay,
well,
that's the point.
If Kubernetes would respect them, then yes.
Yeah. That would be awesome.
Right.
That would be awesome.
But
that
it doesn't.
Kind of, huh?
Right.
I mean,
but it doesn't.
If you go that far, actually, I think that it would be awesome if Kubernetes would respect also the port in Docker file. So that, okay, why would I have to tell you what is the port? Kind of it's in a container, right? But it doesn't. So
exactly, which is why
matter.
Again. So the answer is that. Well, I'm not sure that I like it if it's in the Docker file. To tell you the truth, I still may do it from a Kubernetes perspective. And the reason is because it being in the Kubernetes perspective gives me visibility into that at runtime, and it makes it declarative. So I am very clearly stating, I want port this, I want these health checks, which either Kubernetes would need to publish that to the status and show me this is the port and this is the health checks, right? And source is container. Or, on the other hand, it would be in the spec. But it has to be somewhere in the manifest when I do -o YAML. Because when I'm debugging, I don't want to need to guess what the port is and guess what the health checks that it's running is.
If Kubernetes one way or another, services in this case for port or pods for health checks, if they would discover it from a Docker file, theoretically, then they would have to publish it somewhere, because Kubernetes always publishes everything, all the runtime information. So it would be there. And now when I think aloud, it would be nice, because there are still a lot of developers who really stop at Docker file and don't really go into Kubernetes, ignoring now the discussion whether they should or no. Mm-hmm. And that would and when you think about it, health checks and pods and ports are something that only developer knows, because it's your application, right? So if you have that, it would be nice, but it's not there, so it doesn't matter. It's philosophical at this point.
Exactly.
Podman versus Docker and container file versus Docker file. What is container file, Scott? Is that
container
the dev
file
containers?
Is Podman's alternative to Docker file.
I never grew to like Podman enough to try it deeply, so I don't know. I tend to use Docker. I don't know, you, Scott.
So my opinion is that I way prefer the name container file over Docker file. Because I do not like the fact that everyone calls them Docker files and Docker containers and not just containers or OCI images. So that is the one thing that I like about Podman. Nothing else. And not because I don't like the decisions that Podman made. I think a lot of them, by the way, are better than Docker. Running without a socket, better than Docker. Not needing to run as root, much better than Docker. There are design decisions from Podman that are much better than Docker. The issue is that They had tried to get Mirantis, Docker, whatever, to merge things in. Podman is Red Hat. They tried to get them to merge, to make these changes. There was pushback from Docker, so they just said, great, we're going to create our own thing. And I don't like these side projects that end up, they work in 99% of the cases the same. The issue is always somehow I get very lucky working as a consultant that my customers always are in that 1% that it's not the exact same. And there's always that one application that doesn't work correctly on Podman. And there's always that one situation where it's just a bit different, right? And I just don't like that. The standard is Docker, and you can't use Docker Desktop because you don't want to pay them. Great. So use Rancher Desktop, which uses Docker Community Edition under the hood, and you don't have licensing issues, right? Like, use whatever it is instead. I'm not a fan of Podman, even though I think in theory it's probably better than Docker. I don't like the fact that it's a fork on the side. Like, I don't like the fact that OpenShift is a fork on the side of Kubernetes.
So,
kind of.
I think that...
Although Podman isn't actually a fork.
In my head, those are... I tend to differentiate the tools from formats. Like Dockerfile, unless somebody explained to me why it is truly, truly much better to use some other format, is simply something that works everywhere.
They're the same format, container file.
Just different name.
Basically, there's like one or two new features, or there's a few features that they had, but it's compatible. Like, you can take your Docker file, rename it to container file, and it works.
Okay, then
think of it like Cuddle to Chainsaw. Cuddle to Chainsaw. Okay. There are more features in container file than Docker file, but any Docker file renamed to container file works.
Okay, fair enough. Then yeah, okay, different name, cool. And I agree, container file sounds better.
And you agree that the name is better.
Oh, the name is infinitely better. I think that I cannot express how much I dislike that people continuously ask me, hey, Docker this and that in Kubernetes. You're not running Docker in anywhere. You're running container images that happen to be built by Docker or not, and that does not matter. But yeah. Cool. Okay. Hey guys, from Alexander. Could you give me some advice about some chain loop analog? I don't know what is chain loop analog. Do you know what is a chain loop analog?
Nope.
Well, we don't know.
So sorry, no advice.
What tool should be used to migrate live RDS MySQL to RDS PostgreSQL with minimum downtime? I never tried to migrate, to be honest. It was always, whenever I was involved in switching from one database to another, that was a big deal. Kind of.
Yeah, I don't know about migrating between database engines. That's not my forte at any level. Pray to your deity of choice.
Exactly. Okay, from Nikos, for local Kubernetes cluster, which is your best tool in your opinion? I tend to use Kind, and I have no strong reasons for it, to be honest. It's just that I don't care anymore. Like years ago, I was much into, Kind or Minikube or Rancher and stuff like that. I stopped caring about it, to be honest. I like Kind for... The reason why I like Kind and compared to Docker Desktop is that I can do create cluster and destroy cluster instead of going to the UI. That's my motivation for Kind over Docker Desktop, which introduced that recently, like half a year ago, and it works horribly bad. And I was enthusiastic and then gave up on it. Minikube, I don't know why I don't use Minikube.
So for me, it's Kind, and the reason that it's Kind is because I like its declarative nature, that I have a Kind configuration file and I can set it to do whatever I want. I like the fact that Kind is used upstream in Kubernetes for testing Kubernetes, and therefore I know that it is as close to upstream as possible, and I like that. I like that it's not its own distribution. I like that it is pure Kube ADM based, simple, cluster, everything is great. Upstream easy. I like just the simplicity of Kind as well. I've never wanted to use something like Minikube, And the reason is that whenever I used Minikube, I always disabled every single add-on that they give me.
Because I forgot about add-ons. So fuck me.
Okay?
Yes.
Because I don't want them to. Yes, I can understand why someone who's just getting started in Kubernetes comes and says like, "Oh, I like that. I don't need to deal with installing an ingress controller, and it installs Traefik for me, and it installs." No, you should learn how to do Helm install of any ingress controller out there except for Ingress Nginx. Just look at the CVE that just was released. First one in like 3 months. It's a good success. 3 months without a CVE from Nginx. 3 months ago there was, now there was. 3 months is a long period without a high CVE from them. But in the end, the way that I view this is very simple, which is you should learn how to install it and to have a small bash script that does kind create cluster -f and give it the whatever file configuration.
Always -f.
Pass through the CLI, and then you simply do Helm install. Helm install. Done. I don't think that's much harder than Minikube up.
Yeah, and especially that going back to one of the previous comments is that the goal is not to make it the same as production, but if it can be similar, why not? If you use Contour in production, why not install it in your local cluster, right? Kind of.
Right. And
no good reason
not to. And by the way,
to.
every project in the Kubernetes space, like Contour, all of those, if you go and look at their end-to-end tests and the way that they run end-to-end tests, go and look at their local dev environment, it's always with kind. It typically uses tilt also for the development because that's what's used in Kubernetes. So many people just copied that over. And in the end, they have a script that will bring up kind, install that ingress controller with the correct configuration in it, or they'll have that documented. Like everyone will document how to install it in kind, any of these projects, because that's how things are developed locally by most people in the Kubernetes space. Minikube, you'll find less documentation of if you're doing Minikube, this is how you should set it up. Kind you'll always find, so it's just the easiest.
Okay, another one. Oh, thank you. £2. Nice, especially since I'm going to London in a few days. How to do IDP with Spacelift? I'm not using Spacelift. Are you using Spacelift?
I'm not using Spacelift.
Okay.
I don't remember what Spacelift is. The name is very familiar.
I know that I know the name, and I hope that you know it so that I don't have to Google it to remember.
The IAC Orchestration Platform Engineers Trust.
Now, I'm biased. I think that if you want to do IDP, you should build it on top of Kubernetes. And I think that if you're building it on top of Kubernetes, you should use tools that work well in Kubernetes. And I think that that's neither Terraform nor Ansible, which I see that it's in Spacelift. And I'm biased. I advocate for Crossplane, but you don't have to use Crossplane. You can use, if it's clusters, Cluster API. You can use CRO. You can use Kratix. You can use, what else is there? Kubevela. All of those are better choices in Kubernetes than Terraform or Ansible to create something that is similar to modules. Now, if you're talking about what they do, then again, ignoring Crossplane, there is ACK, there is Google Cloud Connect, right? There is a bunch of tools.
Azure Service Operator, ASO, or what? Yeah.
Yeah. That's another hill I'm going to die on. Doesn't matter which tool you use, but build your IDP on top of Kubernetes and use the tools that work well in Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Okay. Talos Linux or MicroK8s? I used Talos. I haven't used MicroK8s. I don't know. You, Scott?
I don't really like. Again, Talos, in theory, I like. The issue is almost no distribution support it. It's kind of its own distribution, though, but it's also an OS, but it's kind of convoluted. I like it in theory. I'm just not 100% about it yet. MicroK8s, I've never seen the value, personally.
That's the reason why I don't... kind of
shrinking Kubernetes, I don't get. Like K3s, I don't get. I get that in very, very edge use cases of like running at the far edge in like some Raspberry Pi for things like that. But people that are running K3s on AWS and things like that, I know people that do this because they want lower resource consumption. I'm like, you're not doing anything legitimate. Like, really, the 0.0000002 cents that it may cost you a month to run Kubernetes over K3s in some code, that is, like, what's going to break the bill? Like, no. I'm very much against K3s and microkates and K0s and all these things, unless it's for edge. If it's for edge, it makes perfect sense and do it. If an edge, I mean far edge. Anything else, use K8s. Use standard. Not shrink, not micro, not micro, not nano.
That's actually the reason why I said that I haven't used microkates. I have no experience precisely. I never saw the reason for it. Talos, I understand. I might not use it, but kind of it feels like a proper Kubernetes distribution that is even kind of trying to advocate for something different other than changing, removing stuff, right?
Exactly.
Okay, Excalibur's engineering. What's the LOE for creating custom Crossplane provider using Objet? Is it a task can be done in an afternoon by an SRE with intermediate GoFu? And I think that you have to answer this one, Scott, because you just told me half an hour ago that you are building one for Neon.
Yes. So
how much did it take you?
Okay, so I've created a lot of Crossplane providers using Objet. The answer is that the first one that you do is going to take you some time to understand the ins and outs and to understand and to test and to figure it out and get the groove of things and, understand how you find this and where there's that weird resource that works a bit different and how to understand Terraform has had 25 million versions of their SDK that plugins are built off of. So is it a plugin framework or is it the SDK? Which version of the protocol? Is it Proto V5 or Proto V6? Like, there are things you have to understand that sometimes are going to come and bite you and, like, the generation isn't going to work, right? So, like, you have to be aware of it. You have to understand it. But after you build one or two of them, which may take, let's say, a day, right, to build that first one, if you have general knowledge of Go, right, basic Go knowledge, you can create your first one in a day, I would say. After that, I created, for example, let's take a good example, the Akamai Terraform provider, which I had to fork because they didn't publish docs in their repo and we need the docs and whatever, and they didn't follow standards. Thank you, Akamai, for not following Terraform standards. I have forked your Terraform repo in order to make it follow standards. And basically, to create that with, like, I think it's 135 resources, took me 2 hours. Now, I had created already about 6 or 7 providers, though, over the last few months. Right. So I had some experience. I already got it. So then it's just a matter of, creating the 135 resources, which takes some time of mappings. Yes, the first one is going to take a day. Afterwards, hour for a typical small provider. You can easily spit it out.
A day for something that you're doing first time sounds very reasonable.
I thought that you said 10 minutes to try a tool and then throw it away if you can't get it done in 10 minutes. Victor.
I know, but that was not referencing. So if I would switch to Backstage, I want to be able to have it operational somehow in some demo environment in 10 minutes, 15, 20. But I don't expect
not to build a plugin.
Not to build a plugin. No, that's...
exactly.
Whatever I said, that does not apply to such situations. Okay, that's it. Okay, that's a wrap. We're already 15 minutes over. Too many questions that we haven't answered now. Next week, we will have no session because I will be drunk somewhere in London. But the week after that, we'll do it. So see you in 2 weeks. Cheers.
Cheers.